Hi everyone. Today I wanted to respond to a video by Lady Izdihar on the files, where they not only talk about the Epstein files, but the response of people in regards to the files, specifically survivors of trauma. And in this short video on the files, they say, on the Epstein file release, things to keep in mind and think about why some of the most powerful voices that could bring insight might not be feeling up for that, but also the way it plays into class and Marxism. This might get buried because I refuse to verbally use the abbreviation SA, as I feel it downplays a serious topic that should be fully expressed by victims. I would agree. The only time I use SA myself is if I'm in, say, a private server, and the private server is full of rape victims, and those victims are triggered by the term rape in such a way that they already know what I'm talking about, and it's literally a room full of rape victims, and if I can use a different word than that in that specific scenario, I will. But otherwise, I will use the word rape. And the algorithm suppresses that, but it's very similar to talking about genocide, war crimes, what have you, famine, the Holocaust, insofar as the algorithm is on YouTube is designed to suppress all of those things and basically sort of whitewash imperial crimes. Keeping all of that in mind, though, I wanted to respond to Lady Izdihar's call for people, if they felt up to it, to discuss what they are talking about in this video. And point in fact, at the time, I had actually responded. I was raped. One thing I learned is the abuse extends to not being believed. And Lady Izdihar, had acknowledged the comments. It got a bunch of likes. And following that, it inspired me to write a response here, where I just wrote down more thoughts tied to my own experiences as a rape victim, but also survivor of rape, that researches various forms of systemic abuse that historically materially lead to rape and how we dialectically materially can confront that. So after I watched the video by Lady Izdihar, where I quoted it, posted it, the initial message, followed by me editing it here and adding some additional thoughts, I decided to go here to my Anarcho-Communism versus Marxist-Leninism page and make some changes, largely addendums, adding some different definitions and information based on me watching this video, responding to it. It got the old juices flowing, and I decided to expound on my thesis statement, Capital Rapes by Design. The state rapes by design. So what I wanted to do in this video, apart from watching Lady Izdihar and going over my initial response, is reading the changes that I made regarding the research said response is attached to, as well as talking about my experiences as a rape survivor, and not just my experiences, but the people that I work with. I largely work with other sex workers. I'm a sex worker myself. I'm a trans woman, sex worker, activist, academic, anarcho-communist, who talks about rape as something to prevent by camping it through a device that I call Ludogothic BDSM, which is an academic constellation of different things that ultimately come together or coalesce into rape play, a means of preventing rape through various forms of theater that help raise intelligence and awareness regarding rape as something to prevent systemically over space and time. So this doesn't just include my experiences, but the experiences of people I've worked with, other sex workers, including one of my partners, who I interview about their experiences as a rape victim. So in the case of responding to Lady Izdihar and having something to say, I had something to say in the immediate moment. I had something to say regarding research that I had done concerning my experiences and capital. And lastly, I have examples of my own experiences and the experiences of other people tied to said research. So this video is going to go over all of that. Bear in mind, when I go over this material, some of it is on an age-gated page, so I will be reading from said page, but I will be trying to maneuver around the images in question. They're not especially saucy, but most of them. But I will just be focusing on the written material just so I can read this on YouTube, because that presents another logistical problem for talking about rape. Is not only does it get buried by the algorithm, but if you have any images that even, resemble nudity on YouTube, your video will either be 18 or up, or you'll get flagged for pornography, even if you're talking about sexuality, rape, survival in a obviously educational way. You can state all of that, but the AI, the algorithm will still flag you for pornography anyways. It doesn't discriminate. It can't tell the difference between the two, and I've had that happen before. So if I am on an age-gated page going over evidence and I'm, censoring or omitting nude exhibits, that's the reason why. It's not because I don't want to talk about it, but because YouTube is not really the best place for those kinds of discussions, but I will do my best. Keeping all of that in mind, we are now going to watch Lady Izdihar's video, and I will be responding to it. After I respond to it, bit by bit, piece by piece, just pausing to comment every so often, I will go over my initial comments, the comments that I wrote after that, and then my research, and finally my own experiences and the experiences of my friend tied to said research.
I've been really wanting to articulate something about the Epstein files, but like a lot of survivors of sexual assault, I find myself drawing blanks when I try to verbalize what I want to say.
First and foremost, the discussion of rape is something that often leads to a kind of vanishing point or myopia concerning regarding it. It is almost invisible by virtue of the fact that rape is a weapon of terror classically used by the state to encourage silence, and anyone who tries to talk about it is essentially framed as a whistleblower tied to state crimes and state secrets, ultimately. So any attempt from rape victims to talk about something that threatens the nuclear model are essentially hammered by state proponents. And this can take a wide variety of forms. It is effectively unto itself stochastic terrorism tied not just to the event in question, but also the suppression of witness testimony in ways where the abuse victims who survive understand on some level through generational trauma that if they speak out, they will be attacked. They are taught from an early age that you have to navigate various scenarios in ways that keep you alive, while at the same time wanting to speak out about larger systemic issues that if you do speak out about, you will be essentially burned at the stake. You'll be, through the Puritan ethic, treated like a heretic, specifically speaking out about things that are unspeakable. That's where the Gothic comes in. We'll get to that in a bit. Continuing.
And that's exactly one of those extra insidious things about all of this. People think trauma from such a thing is just what actually happened to you, but a very common side effect of assault is what it does to you mentally, and how 10 or 20 years later, you can still find yourself freezing unexpectedly on a topic like this.
I will say the only reason that I don't freeze unexpectedly on this given topic is that I have spent years talking about it, and I have spent years sort of preparing for this moment. Not just talking or responding to Lady Izdihar here, but also in regards to the Epstein files, because when the Epstein files, the latest files being released, were released by the DOJ, a friend of mine, my best friend, reached out to me and said, "Hey, guess what? Chaser billionaires essentially funded the anti-trans movement to have more sex slaves." I was like, no shit. And when I found out about that, I had actually been writing a research series based on state vampirism, state and the capital, so open capitalism and Marxist-Leninism of a more imperial flavor. I had already been researching that based on my own experiences, but also just the experiences of women and queer people in particular, historically around the world. So I was like, "Oh, my time has come." And I felt ready to talk about it because I had already spoken about it many, many times. And the principle of rape play, for instance, Little Gothic BDSM, as I coin it, is that the more you talk about it, the easier it gets. Because to some extent, the ability to police people who talk about rape is limited by the ability for people to apologize for the suppression of rape victims, which in a time like this, I would argue is relatively low because everyone is recognizing the state and the harm it does. So if you're going to talk about rape, now's the time to do it. You don't want to do it when empire is strong, when they have people kind of pinned down. You want to do it when they've lost control of the situation and whistleblowers can blow the whistle.
And I think that sort of blankness or muteness that you're forced into is just your nervous system. Unfortunately, trauma doesn't store itself as a neat story that you can recite to others.
No, it's often quite fragmented. A lot of survivor testimony is kind of postmodern, and not just deliberately in like a post-enlightenment kind of way, but literally fragmented nonlinear narrative. Many rape victims are fractured mentally in ways where they often become plural or they repress memories and they have to retell them the way that a child might, where they tell a story through the creation of some kind of abstract representation of trauma. You know, the drawing of a house, mother, a father, a child, and then there's like a monster somewhere. And that kind of thing isn't just pure fantasy, but it's dialectical material. The traditions of all past generations weigh like a nightmare in the brains of the living, and so many of the specters that Marx talked about were victims of rape, specifically of unequal power abuse. The way I define rape is to take power away from someone to deliberately cause them harm. It's not just penetrative sexual violence experienced by straight white women. It is a wide variety of things. You can rape the mind, the spirit, the body, nature, the land more broadly, labor, in ways where all of these things are connected. They're not discrete things. Under Cartesian dualism and the nuclear model they are, but under capitalism they are, but more broadly, you know, just speaking from one survivor to many others, we all are a part of the same larger nadir where these kinds of stories are normally relegated, where we have no mouth, but we must scream.
Even when you want to. Since a lot of the times you focus on surviving and not necessarily the narration of events.
Ultimately, you have to, the way I learned to approach this situation, and the way that many novelists, neo-Gothic novelists, for instance, learned to adapt, especially in a time when the original novels were written, Anne Radcliffe onwards, is you had to be able to talk about rape in ways that were dressed up as stories that concerned pirates and castles. Think The Princess Bride is a pretty good modern encapsulation of the same basic idea, where Anne Radcliffe wrote about a neo-medieval that was effectively hauntological or retrofuture, but through the chronotope or the time space of the castle, they were able to cryptonymically reveal various aspects of something that is normally abjected or thrown off of normal polite society into a space of romance, Gothic romance, a merger of the ancient romance and the modern novel, the story of manners, into something that is kind of an Heimlich, or an uncanny home that is the home of the vampire, of the barbarian, of the pirate, of the bandit, of the alien. The home is alien in ways that, as my research contends, speaks to the vampiric nature of capital and the state, and you communicate that through code. Oh, we're not exposing state secrets, we're not talking about rape, we're not blowing the whistle, we're just telling a Gothic story. And stories like that are normally quite chaste, e.g. Velma Dinkley and Scooby-Doo. Oh, it's just old man what's his name, and he would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for us meddling kids. There's often a ostensibly chaste character, and those stories ultimately concern, like, material disputes, theft, skull equals theft. Oh no, it's the spooky ghost, the black veil behind which the pirates are stealing money from the landowners. In that case, it's not a perfect execution of the idea, but the same idea is what women can do. I was killed, and behind this is a horrible truth, and if you pull the veil aside, the truth will be revealed. So it's the same basic idea. We just go, a couple steps further than Radcliffe did, because she ultimately commodified her stories. She was kind of the J.K. Rowling of her day, and certainly not as turfy as Rowling, because a lot of the terminology didn't really exist back then, but she was definitely, to some degree, reactionary in ways that people like Rowling would exhibit later. If you read Harry Potter ripped off a lot of neo-Gothic novels. I digress. Let's continue.
So even years later, something like this, which I really want to speak on and pull into my educational sphere, can pull me back into some sort of shutdown or freeze. And it's a bit of a...
Freeze, yeah. And there are 5 different responses to danger, rape responses. So you have fight, flight, fawn, also known as friend, flop, and freeze. In the Gothic, it's often oscillation, where you're trapped between different states. Fight, flight, friend, foe. And freezing is a very natural, ancient human survival mechanism tied to, like, vasovagal, the perception of something that's seen as a threat, often stabbing implements. People will often faint when faced with needles. The same idea of swooning or vasovagal is a common trope in the Gothic, where Gothic heroines in the castle of rape, of danger, of darkness, would have their modesty and honor threatened, because these are debutantes. These are women freshly on the market who would be virginal to some degree, but also detectives in a space where an enemy is lurking nearby, who kind of presents themselves, at least part of the time, as friendly, despite the fact that they would have kidnapped the woman, usually an evil Italian count. And Jane Austen would go on to make fun of this in Northanger Abbey, which is basically the Scream of her day. And in any event, the point being is that this kind of response is something that would inform these kinds of stories in ways where they were trying to disguise what they were doing while testifying to it in essentially flights of fantasy and fancy, but it wasn't explicitly that. There was something else going on. But the same basic mechanism, vasovagal, facing the slasher, the final girl trope in later generations, is something that also incidentally informs social movements more broadly outside of just overt popular media, such as #MeToo.
A reminder to myself and others that you don't just deal with what someone did to you. You deal with everything after as...
Yes, and sorry I keep pausing here, but I did want to say this is what inspired me to comment myself, because the moment I heard this, I'm like, yep, and I said in response, I was raped. One thing I learned is the abuse extends to not being believed. It's not just the event, but everything that follows in its wake. This includes the rapist themselves, but also everything that emboldened them to start with. A system upon which rape isn't just expected, but demanded to maintain the status quo under capital, the state/nuclear model. And we'll unpack this after we're done watching the video, but yes, there are so many things that you have to deal with. The rape itself is generally over quite quickly, and the worst part of it, in my opinion, isn't the physical side of things, but the emotional damage that occurs years after, 4 years, from people who weren't even present when the actual event itself took place. So oftentimes whistleblowers are denied the ability to testify or disbelieved by other people who should know better. Women often don't believe other women.
as well. People not believing you, people treating it like it was your fault, being called crazy.
Blaming the whore, the mad woman in the attic. These are all, of course, Gothic tropes and things that my research specializes in, but they're also quite common. They speak to everyday events regarding the punching down at rape victims by other people, women or otherwise. It could be a family member who doesn't believe you, a parent, a grandparent, an uncle, a neighbor. You're trying to tell someone, and for you to be believed just right out of the gate doesn't always happen, unfortunately. In my experience, I was relatively lucky insofar as some of the people I told did believe me, but there were plenty more, usually strangers on the internet, I might add, who didn't believe me, including women.
And all of it piles up until speaking becomes difficult at sometimes the worst possible time.
You hesitate. You hesitate because you anticipate further reprisals.
That's what makes all of this so frustrating right now. People are very much so underreacting, and the people with the most to say are often fighting the lasting effects of what was done to them. And then there's this other layer, how almost no one is surprised. We all suspected, we all knew, so where's the justice in all of that? Not that I think we should expect justice from the United States.
Right? It's a settler colony. It's a police state, and it's run by the same people it's always been run by. So expecting justice from the very people who did you harm, that's kind of the Radcliffean paradox, if you will, where the people who are solving crimes for the state, the Scooby-Doo sort of instance, it's an assimilation fantasy of sorts, where Velma Dinkley solved the crime, and ostensibly she gets recruited at that point, after a certain number of solved murders. Murder, She Wrote, same idea. You solve a certain number of murders. Eventually the idea is there must be some kind of reward, right? But it's always presented in those stories like, oh, well, exposing it is just sort of its own reward, and the status quo never really changes. And you'll notice that murders keep happening in Murder, She Wrote, and old people keep stealing shit and dressing up as ghosts in Scooby-Doo. It's not actually preventing anything. So, my idea when speaking out is we actually have to do it in ways that justice is holding those in power accountable, not what Martin Luther King would call, instead of negative justice or the absence of tension, peace is a white man's word, the white moderate, that kind of thing. We have to actually speak out about rape in recognizing systemic issues, e.g. the United States, capital, the state model. Democracy is built on slavery, ergo rape. If you go back to ancient Athens, for instance, women were second-class citizens. And if you spoke out, you were treated as an Amazon. Amazons were classically defeated in battle. They were basically patriarchal men, fearful men of Greece, making a Darvo argument. Oh, we're scared of the Amazons. The Amazons are dangerous. They're threatening democracy. And this is the same exact thing that has happened millennia later in the United States. And it doesn't just affect white straight women, of course. It affects a wide variety of marginalities that are marginalized by design, ergo raped by those in power. The structure itself, invasion is a structure. Patrick Wolf, sorry, not Richard Wolf, different person. Patrick Wolf, invasion as a structure, exterminating the native or someone treated like native. And if you do away with the original indigenous population and you have a bunch of white women living in a settler colony, they will be raped. And they were arguably raped the entire time because they were used as human shields during a genocide. But after the initial massacres have taken place, those women are still abused. They exist in a liminal space. We'll get to that. Continuing.
But I think you can see how that weighs even more on people. The perpetrators face no real consequence, and all of those children and women are left with no clarity, no closure, and no tangible empathy.
I think it's also worth noting that men can be rape victims. Trans people, obviously, queer people, but just speaking about, men in particular, even though the odds of them being abused are far less likely, just in status quo circumstances, white straight men are less likely to be abused outside of prison environments, mind you, or child abuse. So it's women, children and boys before they grow up to be men are often sexually abused by a parent, usually a father, a husband, a boyfriend. It can happen. Women can abuse people, but usually within positions of power where they have unequal power over someone. So it could be a single mother, often who is disordered in some shape or form, mentally disturbed, might go on to abuse a child. It's a lot less common, certainly a lot less studied, and oftentimes we are left cursed by having survived these events, because I wasn't just sexually abused. I was sexually abused as an adult by a female partner who was gender nonconforming, like I was. But as a child, I was abused physically by my father and stepfather. I was beaten. And my mom divorced my father in the mid-90s, and I basically suffered the shame, not just of being abused, but also the fact that my mom divorced my dad. So she was treated like the town whore. Everyone called her crazy. And then I was made fun of because I came from a divorced family. That wasn't very common where I was at the time. It was a source of shame for me, the victim. And everyone knew, but they chose to make fun of me instead of my father. And that same white, straight male privilege extended to my stepfather. And if you fast forward to when I was an adult, just the fact that I was abused by someone who wasn't a white, straight man, the abuser is still, generally speaking, given the benefit of the doubt, even if they're not a man. Just talking about rape is taboo. It's forbidden. And the abuse victim is often, like you say, denied clarity, denied justice. And justice, as far as I'm concerned, is the ability to testify in ways that change society to whatever degree we're able. How else are we going to make workers more intelligent, emotionally, gothically, more class, culture, and racially aware if we don't talk about this? And you have to, find when the moment is right, you can speak out in ways where people are more inclined to listen. Oftentimes during movements like this, where people are already pissed off and they're already mad at the state, so they're not in love with the state. The rose-tinted glasses have been removed. And the only way to have justice, as far as I'm concerned, is to testify to our rape in ways that will actually be believed, even if there is a degree of fancy to it, the telling of stories, horror stories, for instance, or things that sound like they're so horrible that they could never be real, because for many people, rape is impossible for them to imagine, because to talk about rape is to invoke capitalist realism. It's the end of the world. It's the end of the nuclear model. The horror is, again, bringing about something that, bringing it into Plato's cave, into a space of illusion that frames itself as republic, as democracy. And when you talk about that shit, you get blamed. But in moments like this, in moments of uprising, that ceases to necessarily be the case. Democracy is eclipsed by the reality of its own crimes. And even if people can't easily perceive those because they're so shocked by this giant, opaque, cryptonymic space, this giant sphere, this black castle, the appearance of Dracula's castle, something like that, that eclipse the sunlight of empire. It's literally sundowning. That's the moment when the things that go bump in the night, the horrors in the dark, e.g., Antoinette Causeway from White Sargasso Sea, also known as Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Bronte. John Rice rewrote the story from Bertha, aka Antoinette Causeway's perspective. She was literally the mad woman in the attic, the woman of color, who was consigned to an existence in Britain after the collapse of the colonies, the sugar colonies in the Caribbean, if memory serves. She was literally someone who went bump in the night. And the idea is to try and have us be able to speak out about shit like this without getting murdered, to further a nuclear narrative, insofar as Reader, I married him. So Bertha is killed in Jane Eyre so that Jane Eyre can marry Mr. Rochester. And there's a lot of rape apologia there tied to generational harm, tied to systemic abuse. Literally, slavery, the Caribbean slave trade in particular. So that same principle, though, is something that rape victims experience on home soil as well. All right, sorry I keep pausing this. Let's try and get through the rest of this without me pausing too much.
In thinking on this, I think there's also a Marxist lens to the matter, of course, because it's not some isolated individual fringe evil. It's the classic case of power protecting itself.
Yes, as I would say, the state is white, straight, and male, but it also tokenizes and it gentrifies through various assimilation fantasies that through the historical material boom and bust decay. So, feminism, first wave and second wave feminism, for instance, would gentrify, but then under state crisis and decay, they would take away those friendly masks, those Western liberal masks, and expose themselves to be fascist the entire time, e.g. J.K. Rowling.
Epstein was protected because of what he was, a rich man, a connected man, and
a straight man.
Man inside the ruling class. And Marxists have been saying this for over a century, that the world is divided by power and power defends itself.
Specifically power arranged in a vertical format. So anarcho-communists would have to remind everyone that this is a pyramid scheme that defends a very small group of people at the top at the expense of everyone else, because the system is designed to exploit, rape them. To take away their rights and take as much from them in terms of power, in terms of land, labor, language, anything that they can take, sex, monsters, anything and everything the state will monopolize for itself. Violence, terror, morphological expression, so R.E. Weber, Asprey, and my own writings on those various monopolies. These are all things that power, specifically vertical power, defends itself to maintain vertical arrangements thereof, bourgeois hegemony. And it will rely on various things in order to do that, specifically through the middle class, R.E. Howard Zinn's A People's History of America, the purchasing of loyalty through middle class concessions, or concessions from the bourgeoisie to a middle class that was designed as a buffer. And you see that with white landowning men, but also first and second wave feminists, for example, generally white women, white middle class cis women, sometimes lesbians, but often straight. So in order to have our justice, as I've discussed so far, we have to arrange power horizontally. And that's because that's ultimately what Marx and company are arguing for with the stateless, classless, moneyless, raceless, gender non-conforming society. Those are things that I added on top of the original trifecta, but you get the point.
Lenin said that the state is a product and a manifestation of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms.
Lenin also, I just want to point out, because I'm in kind of a critical mood, also argued for a dictatorship of the proletariat. So the same abuses that we're seeing in the United States did also occur elsewhere, not just in Soviet Russia, but in just states more broadly. You're always going to have shadows of state abuse. Some are more culpable than others, but Stalin, for instance, had a pedophile best friend, Beria, who would, routinely abduct 12-year-old girls, drive around with the Russian secret police, what eventually became the KGB, if memory serves, but they were called something else before that. In any event, pedophilia and rape, the raping of women, isn't something that's just restricted to the United States, because the United States in capital rape by design, and various aspects of capital materially, but also ideologically through the superstructure, 16th century ecology, R.E. Patel and Moore, were borrowed by nation states more broadly, including Soviet organizations thereof. There are various things that relied on women being kept in the household, a burden of care that also ties to prostitution or the criminalization of sex work out from the West into the East, the czars, Caesar, borrowing things from antiquity, but also in later centuries, from the 1600s onwards, essentially. So these are problems that I talk about in my research as well. It's to maintain power in ways that doesn't just include United States executives, but also the Russian heads of state, past and present.
Meaning that it currently exists to manage society in the interests of that dominant class. the bourgeoisie. Wealthy abusers facing no consequences is the system working as designed.
Yes, absolutely. Also, Frederick Engels here, Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State, would go on to describe sodomy as abominable. And they go on to say, what happens eventually is people will make up their own minds once the material conditions have been removed as barriers. The ideological mentality that upholds the status quo can fall. And that was what Engels was arguing here. But in this same thing, the family, they talk about how men abuse women and through marriage, amatonormativity, the nuclear model, is something the household, and the household isn't something that is restricted explicitly to open capitalists. It also includes like state capital. It includes something that could be described on the tin as socialism developing towards communism, but these abuses are still going to occur, especially through Stalin and a dictatorship of the proletariat, where they pulled away various rights of women over time. They love-bombed people. And with the opening revolution, they gave women and queer people various rights only to take them away again. And that only got worse over time. They became more openly capitalist over time, the fall of the Soviet Union, decades after Stalin and Lenin had died.
Even Engels said that the first-class oppression coincides with that of the female sex by the male.
Yes. Also, Engels was homophobic, and Marx was homophobic. And this homophobia is something that ties to various problems as far as getting away from the state model. It's not just a class thing. It's class, it's race, it's culture, it's sex and gender. It's the exploitation of workers in ways where women are exploited, yes, through class, but also various other factors as well, in ways that Engels wasn't entirely able to imagine. He called it, and what will there be new? And what will emerge after is largely something of a negative character in regards to what will disappear. And what will there be new is something that is left to workers after Engels, in Engels' own words. So Engels was definitely onto something, but he was certainly an imperfect character himself.
Misogyny also is welded into structures of class society itself. Women's bodies are another avenue for domination.
Or people treated like women. So from Cartesian thought, you have thinking beings versus extended beings. So anything that's seen as a extended being by a thinking being per Enlightenment thought, re a 16th century ecology, would affect capital and state models more broadly. And this is the vertical power arrangements that I'm talking about. Is there's divine right, the great chain of being, the state versus workers. Like these all serve a similar role, and a lot of these ideas are things that affect people worldwide, not just in the United States, but elsewhere, including the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation afterwards. So this is something that we have to combat systemically in ways that affect everywhere, differently, mind you, but with similar effects in regards to the abuse of women, in regards to the perpetuation of rape through capital and the state, what I call state vampirism.
Where power proves it can do whatever it wants.
Also, incidentally, they're doing this not just against women, but through a 16th century ecology towards nature as monstrous feminine. Nature is a whore that can be pimped out in various ways, that can be raped, treated like property.
So I really think that the facade of American equality in the international sphere, as it tries to propel itself or uphold itself as this beacon of
under Red Scare. Yeah, it's total bullshit. The United States is just as guilty of various things that other places have been guilty of in the past, and it basically was like, we're not guilty of this, the Russians are, which is, every confession is a crime insofar as Darvo goes. It's projection. The abjection process, as Julia Kristeva would talk about. And ultimately something that we want to reverse through the same language, Gothic language of monsters, for instance. The horror testifies in ways that sort of present them as Amazons and Gorgons and Avengers, femme fatale, femme forte, and femme fatale, and speaking out in ways that will automatically see us become demons in the eyes of the state, if not out and out Russians. Are you some kind of communist? You some kind of socialist? You some kind of Russian? Are you a Russian spy? The femme fatale kind of thing. It's the same kind of idea, though. The people who testify are often punched down against by puritanical sorts. Under a Protestant ethic, to maintain capital, you have to have some kind of greater good. And that's what the United States has done for centuries.
Some kind. Better than that country. At least we're not like them. Well, I think it all collapses in moments like this because we're watching U.S. capitalism choosing not to protect victims or even children. Of course, Marxists have been saying this forever. It protects wealth, it protects men with connections, it protects the ruling class.
It protects the ruling class, but it also protects the state more broadly as heteronormative and capable of conducting imperialism, often colonialism or settler colonialism, various forms of imperialism. So it's not just protecting class interests, but it's protecting class interests that are arranged through state models that extend to the household, the nuclear model. The horror, the person who testifies to rape, as the Gorgon did, is someone who is wrecking the home by upending the illusion. They are coming from outside Plato's cave into it to testify and ultimately be attacked by those of the in-group. They are a terrorist, a criminal. They are other. They are abject. They are alien. They are the whore. And the whore is classically attacked by the holier-than-thou. Many pimps are women. Not like officially, but de facto, ipso facto. They are unofficial by virtue of action, pimping each other. Divide and conquer.
Our society yet again fails to deliver justice, instead making these things actually permissible to a certain class. And yeah, it's horrible, it's depressing, but it's also yet another very public ordeal that can push the working class together towards class consciousness.
And I would argue intersectional consciousness. These are intersectional problems, which means that they pertain to class, culture, and race. Culture pertaining to sex and gender performance, gender identity, identity politics more broadly. These are things where consciousness isn't just matters of class consciousness, but class intersecting with culture and race to raise emotional and gothic intelligence pertaining to discussions of rape. The more you play with these things, the more you discuss them, the better you get at talking about them in ways where they won't just have this, your audience won't have this knee-jerk response to you trying to talk about things that need to be discussed. The abjection process, where you throw away things from yourself, and society does this tied to, material aspects of the base, the superstructure going hand in hand. Society will abject things that if you try and reverse abjection, they will often regurgitate that. They will reject it. It will be repulsive to them. So you have to find ways to make it palatable. And that includes the testimony of the horror, often as a campy vice character figure. The Gorgon, Tim Curry from Rocky Horror Picture Show, Nimona from Nimona, specifically the Netflix adaptation. I think I saw it on Netflix, where you have characters that are speaking out in places where they're allowed to exist liminally and testify to things in a vice character kind of way. Shylock from The Merchant of Venice, Darth Vader from Star Wars. There's so many different examples of that, and they're important to listen to, but also learn how to do ourselves. If people won't take the truth straight, sometimes a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, even if it's brown sugar, even if it's darkness visible, as Milton would say. It is something that we can use to help lubricate a raising of consciousness in an intersectional, holistic way through what Paulo Freire would call a pedagogy of the oppressed. And a pedagogy of the oppressed isn't just to combat hunger, as Paulo Freire would discuss, but also rape, as I would discuss, notably through a Gothic lens. And it bears repeating that Marx himself was a Gothicist.
And united against the bourgeoisie. I think more and more people are seeing that the common enemy is the bourgeoisie, and who has the tools, history, and texts to understand and know what to do.
Marxist-Leninists and anarcho-communists. We spend our entire lives preparing for moments like this.
Anyways, what are your thoughts, comrades?
Also, rape victims, incidentally. Rape victims are often going to be radicalized either into positions of reactionary, but also revolutionary behavior. It's always kind of a dice roll with that kind of thing. Trauma is something that pushes people to become cops, victims, or survivors. And survivors, rape survivors in particular, testify to issues of class, culture, and race, where you can contribute to a larger movement pushing towards consciousness. But it's definitely an uphill battle.
Anyone else out there that is comfortable speaking that may have also faced some of the kinds of assault that you're seeing in these files?
Yes. Obviously, in my case, I'm comfortable speaking about this, and it's not easy. Like, even now, it's stressful. It takes work. It's something I feel fairly confident about, but it's like you're a lion tamer and you're Siegfried and Roy, and you're putting your head in the tiger's mouth. You can do it any number of times, no matter how confident you are. There's always some degree of risk. And, through Little Gothic BDSM, I would argue that it's a form of calculated risk, operating through code and buffers that give us some degree of safety and protect us from the dangers that people who testify about rape normally face. But even then, I'm constantly attacked by people. I'm constantly attacked by people I think would know better, including Marxist-Leninists, token or reactionary Marxist-Leninists, because not all Marxist-Leninists are alike, obviously. Plenty of them are perfectly fine, such as Lady Izdihar here. They are a wonderful comrade and someone that I appreciate insofar as they've inspired me in their own work to grow more confident myself. So by the time I came across this video, I had already been preparing for a long time. In any event, yeah, this is my response to Lady Izdihar, and we read my initial response. Now I want to go over a slightly longer response within a larger body of work, and then go over the testimony of me and my friends within said work. So, as I said, after I saw the video, I quote messaged it here as a quote post in my community posts on my page, where I say, the same thing that I said in the comments. I was raped. One thing I learned is the abuse extends to not being believed. But then I wrote a larger statement. Now, I wrote it here initially, but then I went on to quote it here. So I thought what I would do, because I took that statement and I quoted it here, but I also decided to add some extra definitions and things to this. So despite the fact that I already have a video that I released yesterday where I read this series compendium where I talk about state vampirism, I made some changes directly in response to Lady Izdihar's video. Initially just this paragraph here, but then I went into this compendium and I made further changes, including adding my own testimony and talking about that in ways that I think would be germane to a larger conversation about not just testifying to rape, but doing it in ways that are designed or conducive to revolutionary action. So keeping all of that in mind, I'm going to read that now. I'll read a portion of this that is essentially new. We will just be reading the opening, the abstract, and the initial part of Unpacking State Vampirism, Rape, and Camping It. There are postscripts that essentially I've already read elsewhere, so I won't be reading those. After we get through all of that, I will go over some of my testimony as a rape survivor and read an interview from my partner who also testified to them being raped as a part of my larger body of work. Anarcho-Communism versus Marxist-Leninism, RE State Vampirism, Compendium, Safer Work version. Originally written February 2nd, 2026, with some addendums written last night and earlier in the morning. This blog post re-uploads the opener compendium to my essay series State Vampirism in a Safer Work format, lacking outright pornographic nude images, only the tops of some butts and underwear. It remains otherwise identical to the not safe for work version on my 18 and up website. My research activism into anti-capitalism concerns various essays I have written on Marxist-Leninism, but also personalities, i.e. when critiquing Marxist-Leninism alongside capitalism for its historically predatory qualities tied to state models, which ANCOMs reject, e.g. when preying vampirically on women, queer people, and sex care workers, unpaid labor, similar to out-and-out capital, which rapes by design. My theories concerning state vampirism feeding borrow directly from Marx's ideas of vampirism, using them to critique the likes of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, but also the man himself, a noted anarcho-communist, for leading two such persons, i.e. by camping him and his followers in ways ML Apologia dogmatizes. For the sake of organization and time, I divided these critiques into essays, i.e. in conjunction with my Sex Positivity book series after it concluded on June 2025. This subpage only contains essays. Click here to access all of said series' promotional content. Likewise, these essays only concern state vampirism. I've written smaller essays on vampirism in my Undead module, and my entire submodule on vampires eat me alive. Regarding rape and its definition, meaning, from my definition, to disempower someone or somewhere, a person, culture, or place, in order to harm them, generally through fetishizing and alienizing acts or circumstances, socio-material conditions that target the mind, body, and or spirit. Rape can be of the mind, spirit, body, and or culture, the land or things tied to it during genocide, etc. It can be individual and or on a mass scale. By comparison, Little Gothic BDSM is my 2023 combining of an older academic term, ludic Gothic, Gothic video games, with sex-positive BDSM theatrics as a potent means of camp on and off stage, specifically rape play, by placing rape in quotes mid-Gothic, where rape and playing with it is ubiquitous. To camp rape is to place rape in quotes, using Gothic's campy motives and means. Quote, monopolies are a myth, the only certainty that such things are fought over using themselves, canon versus camp. Camp equals rape play, to reverse abjection, and we camp canon because we must, from Colin Broadmoor to me, 2021 and 2023. This happens by enjoying taboo things, specifically by playing with them in subversive ways that liberate sex work, therefore all work. Enjoy harm without endorsing its unironic forms, subversive play, a necessary form of critique during Little Gothic BDSM regarding things normally played without thought. Me vis-a-vis Anita Sarkeesian's famous adage. Unquote. Source, Sharing the Blame, 2025. By placing it in quotes, workers can reverse abjection, ergo profit to a dialectical material degree. So many of the specters of Marx that Marx spoke of actually being women, ethnic minorities, indigenous people, the disabled, and queer folk, i.e. not just paid Western European factory workers, but also unpaid labor, or from Cartesian thought, extended beings. To this, abjection equals us versus them, alienation and fetishization, serving profit through capital, the state, raping workers. The rape occurs, and workers must camp it to transform the curse mid unheimlich, one often concerned, as Gothic historically materially is, with liberial to a mechanically fearsome degree, the grinding up of so much living stuff with unliving stuff, welcome to the machine below. Regarding Marx and his ideas on vampirism, quote, capital is dead labor, which vampire-like lives only by sucking living labor and lives the more labor it sucks. Unquote. Source, Limits of the Working Day, 1867, from Capital. Marx was a philosopher, and so much of philosophy is poetic. In this respect, Marx was also a Gothicist, but he wasn't gay enough for our tastes or aims. R.E. Gothic communism's chief aim is to be campier, thus sexier and funnier than Marx, i.e. camping his ghost to develop a holistically intuitive anarcho-communism begot through a widespread, collective, and solidarized emotional and Gothic intelligence awareness that recultivates the superstructure and reclaims the base through intersectional resistance and de facto extracurricular re-education. The wisdom of the ancients, or a cultural understanding of the imaginary past, endemic to this organizational process, and not one any particular group can monopolize through violence, terror, and monsters, etc. Unquote. Source, Gothic Communism Series Abstract. Our dialectic, though material, is of the alien, one Marx to some degree actively ignored, omitted from the narrative by being homophobic. You have the basic ideas above to get the gist. However, given their sensitive and secretive nature, I'd like to unpack them some more before giving you the essay list. After all, returning and reflecting upon old points after assembling them is a powerful way to understand larger structures and patterns, especially if they're designed to conceal themselves through subterfuge, valor, and force. It's what holistic study, the foundation of this book, is all about. Now we're going to read the front of Unpacking State Vampirism, Rape, and Camping It. We will not be reading the postscripts, however. Note, as I conceive it, state vampirism equals feeding through the state mid-abjection, be it openly capitalist or Marxist-Leninist. These are largely questions of aesthetic, whose Promethean self-destructive function extends to other configurations of omolus, e.g. Zionism. Zionism is a secular colonial device whose ethnocentric divide-and-conquer models overlap with racism, Orientalism, and other modular tools of division and persecution, i.e. canonically arbitrating war as business for productivity and profit, all by utilizing Cartesian thought, heteronormativity, and secular colonialism tied to state monopolies of violence, terror, and monsters, sex, R.E. Weber, Asprey, and me, she the state's key tools from paratextual Gothic documents. To be effectively anti-Zionist, meaning in ways that actually challenge state / the capital's vampiric feeding mechanism and poetics, unlike fascism, is to be anti-racist, anti-white supremacist, anti-war for business, etc., as intersecting modules, and a larger intersectional, dualistic solution to an intersectional problem that likewise critiques Marxist-Leninism, sharing the same basic language and spaces of play. So does Gothic gay Anarcho-Communism and Ludo-Gothic BDSM, rape play, dialectically materially reclaim imbricating persecution language, e.g. blood libel, sodomy, and witchcraft, doing so holistically and dualistically to reverse abjection, ergo state predation, vampirism, which historically materially prey through said territories to further abjection on stage and off. The state hates sex, but needs it to survive, policing it through various rapacious paradoxes borrowed from city-state slavery and ancient world imperialism. Furthermore, there's overlap between my anti-Zionist work and my work critiquing Marxist-Leninism alongside capital, so consider reading both. Abjection, which state predation and revolutionary action both rely on to function, i.e. on the aegis, is something to further or reverse mid-vampirism through unpaid, paid labor, re me vis-a-vis Julia Kristeva. To that, abjection, us versus them, alienation, and fetishization is one of four main Gothic theories my book series utilizes, the other three being hauntology, retrofuture, cryptonomy, show-hide, and chronotope, time-space, alongside smaller theories, e.g. Gerald Hogel's Ghost of the Counterfeit, and Barbara Creed's Monstrous Feminine, Gorgons and Amazonomachia, as I study it. As a queer sex worker and academic, I dialectically materially prioritize abjection and vampirism through unpaid labor, chiefly sex work, exploited by Cartesian dualism and its harmful maximalist binaries under capitalist realism, but mention the other theories too. Access four main Gothic theories, the 4Gs, in paratextual Gothic documents for their longer definitions. In essence, capital, the state, rape by design, which unpaid labor prevents by breaking capitalist realism mid-abjection, i.e. during Little Gothic BDSM, having the horror's revenge, outlined below, but which state vampirism explores at length. Quote, per Marx and myself, capitalism alienates and sexualizes everything. Nature is monstrous feminine as such, empowerment applying to any aspect of our life, bodies, violence, and terror. The state wishes to monopolize control, and any trope, convention, cliché, or fetish that might be used to degrade, humiliate, rape, or otherwise demonize, dominate beings of nature per capital's qualities, re. secular colonial, heteronormative, and Cartesian, i.e. that we can reclaim during Little Gothic BDSM. To do so is to break capital's hold in all things demons, darkness, and nature they stole and monopolized, in turn smashing their own abjection against them and breaking capitalist realism with our aegis, to deny capital's dead labor and language feeding on living labor and language according to what power and knowledge we exchange to and fro. The horde's revenge is to break the profit and productivity motive by making a world for which it and rape are no longer possible using these methods, i.e. by using the same demonic and slutty language capital does, but at cross purposes, to hug the alien, not demonize it to receive state violence, thereby exchanging how the world is seen to begin with. To it, I was raped, a topic I've written about on more than one occasion, given cause in the case of the Epstein files release to talk about it once more. I was raped. I'm a rape survivor from raising awareness. One thing I learned is the abuse extends to not being believed. It's not just the event, but everything that falls in its wake. This includes the rapist themselves, but also everything that emboldens them to start with, a system upon which rape isn't just expected, but demanded to maintain the status quo under capital, the state/nuclear model. Edit. Being a trans white gothicist, I can safely say that cis white women already sit in a liminal position. Trans women, however, sit in a space of the monstrous feminine, wherein we can be both rapist and raped, admittedly one that cis women also experience to some degree, the Gorgon, Amazon, and similar avengers of a fort or fatale character out of antiquity into present times, but for which the feminist pecking order classically tokenizes through TERFs, i.e. to punch down at, fetishize trans women as vampires, and trans men as confused slaves, damsels in distress, under Dracula's spell. The whole thing is deeply rooted in patriarchy, misogyny, and anti-Semitism, but also capital gentrifying feminism to tokenize and decay in defense of the nuclear model. All the same, the paradox of safety isn't in segregation and assimilation, but exposing the very things that put us at risk from the get-go, in ways that are both risky and empowering. To that, liberation and exploitation share the same stages, bodies, and language, meaning among good actors and bad, wherein capital, the state, rape by design, and often by targeting the mind, gaslight, gatekeep, girlboss. In turn, rape isn't just of sexual violence and penetration, though TERFs monopolize it as such, ranking rape, regarding tokenism and fighting it, but various forms of in-group, out-group power abuse that workers must subvert on the aegis, ourselves. Knows no reversing a curse, the burden rape presents, something to transform through generational trauma, gradually reclaimed on all registers, a source of shame. Blaming the whore is something for cop-like entities to sniff out, a witch hunt, one commonly waged by women against other women, cis or not. Unquote. Source, YouTube community post, Persephone Waard, 2/3/2026, in response to Lady Izdihar's On the Files. So often women are bullied into silence, until they bully others into silence, but they can also conspire amongst each other to speak out, passing down stories of abuse that help the next generation break the cycle. To that, my mother is a rape victim, above. As are many of the people I work with, the state and its defenders treated like women. In Gothic, this often happens through stories in some shape or form, and by finding common ground through dialectic, and by finding common ground through struggle to dialectically materially heal from rape as a systemic curse of sorts, from raising awareness. We're effectively making Marx gay by employing the same Gothic devices he did, but further than he and his followers actually tried, to heal from state abuse, while disguising ourselves as mere play through cryptonomy, reversing abjection. The Western world is generally a place that testifies to its own traumas by fabricating them, as markers of sovereignty that remain historically unkind to specific groups that nevertheless survive within them as ghosts of unspeakable events linked to systemic abuse. Trauma, in turn, survives through stories corrupted by the presence of said abuse. There is a home resembling a castle, where a ghost, often of a woman, lurks inside, having been met with a sorry fate. But undeath is something that can be felt through echoes of ourselves that aren't diegetically spectral. They feel spectral through an uncanny resemblance, like standing over our own graves. This becomes something to play with during Little Gothic BDSM. To be clear about rape as something to play with, it's still a weapon, but not one the state can exclusively monopolize. The Gorgon is a numinous being of rape/terror weapon that, in functionally rebellious hands, can turn state atrocities backwards, i.e. by employing the Promethean quest to reverse abjection on the aegis. Such cryptonomy, a concealed weapon of mere play that nonetheless paralyzes state capacities to cause harm, through nakedly calculated risk, a palliative numinous playing God with gods, specifically homewrecker sorts that camp the canon to such an earth-shattering degree as to threaten the nuclear order, therefore capitalist realism. It's, to be blunt, what the Gothic does. Commonly this occurs through fear of theft come home, itself fetishized as bandit, pirate, bastard, in ways the state romances to serve profit. but the same terror weapons classically belong to the horrors punching up made objection, i.e. while backing it up, invoking badass through weapons-grade puns of the medieval sort, essentially bouncing this or that off their weaponized fortress-like bodies. As numinous, fearful, fascinating sources of terror like sex, the horror a classic homewrecker, demonized through the criminalization of sex work by state powers, sends Medusa into an ongoing neo-Gothic period, e.g. Naya Blue, above, covered in symbols of fear, that speak to her as fearsome to behold by puritanical agents dreading her release. Quote, not only can terror be employed as a weapon, but any weapon can become a weapon of terror. Terror is a weapon is terror, and no one agency monopolizes it. Terror is the kissing cousin of force, and real or implied is never far removed from the pages of history. To define and condemn terror from a peculiar social, economic, political, and emotional plane is to display a self-righteous attitude that, totally unrealistic, is doomed to be disappointed by harsh facts. Unquote. Source Robert Asprey's War in the Shadows. In turn, abjection goes both ways. Theft, a perennial but also surveilling device, mid-imprisonment. To it, the state loves horrors or those treated like horrors by state vampirism, which is to say the state loves and fears what their contradictory models demand, to fetishize someone for rulers to lay on top of, giving the iconoclast an edge, room to work when push comes to shove, and the fight takes to the gutter. Horrors are essentially guerrillas, and vampires gay ninjas, working war cryptonymically from spaces and embodiments of concealment, with many of the people I work with operating behind multiple masks, aliases, and buffers, stealing their labor back through the shadowy veneer of rumored seduction, fatal attraction, and all-around sin. Eat the fucking apple, as Megan McAuliffe O'Leary would put it. Re, liberation and exploitation share the same place, and there's no escape to be had from hiding in the long run. Be the apple as something to eat, stealing your power back in the bargain. Play becomes a creative, clever means of disguise and subversion all at once, the witch a kind of horror that puritanical men and witch hunters at large commonly fear retribution of, re, the horror's revenge. Eating us won't help you cheat death. So the Gorgon is a goddess of life and death, one who patiently reminds patriarchs how a king has his reign, and then he dies, i.e. Trump, growing old and mad to devour his sons, Goya style, above, and also become an object of Ozymandian, chaotic pity by ordinary care workers doing revolutionary optimism. Rape goes both ways, empowering the usual victims of state theft to castrate the origins of a dying curse, its rotten core to consume and fertilize with fresh change by the unsung mothers of a better world. Horse keeps secrets they pass along through code, the apple poisoned with useful data. So that was effectively, much of that is changes that I have included in response to Lady Izdihar. So this was me contributing to a past dialogue that I had already produced as part of an ongoing dialogue between a Marxist-Leninist, Izdihar, and myself, a queer anarcho-communist. So those are the changes that I made. We're not going to be reading the postscript or going over the essays. I already have a video where I do that. But that should give you an idea of what I'm talking about when I discuss rape play, testifying to rape in Gothic language, in ways not entirely dissimilar to Marx, if I'm honest, just less homophobic and exclusionary than Marx was. Marx wasn't just homophobic, he was also, from what I understand, anti-Semitic. He was born a secular Jew, but he had anti-Semitic tendencies himself. And this extends to other groups as well. Marxist-Leninism under Stalin and company, the Soviet Union, were atheists compelled through the state, which literally outlawed any other religion, including Judaism, effectively making them anti-Semitic to boot. Compelled atheism is just another form of state tyranny, so we want to watch out for that as well. And that was something that you could see even in Marx. So yeah, all of that being said, what I want to do now is I want to go over some of my own testimony as a rape survivor, but also another person who worked alongside me who allowed me to interview them and publish their testimony as a rape survivor too. Scrolling up to I was raped, I'm a rape survivor from Raising Awareness. This is where the testimony is located. So this is from a previous document that I wrote investigating a Marxist-Leninist who was punching out at me, specifically for trying to testify to various things in regards to the rights of trans people, sex workers, women, indigenous people, plural people, furries, etc. So if we click on this, we open it in a new window. This is age-gated, mind you, and I'm only going to be reading portions that cover the writing of various things, but we will be censoring or omitting various images on this page. But if you go to this page, you'll notice that it is age-gated, sex ed notice. This page and others like it on this blog use fig leaf style semi-censored nudity to bolster sex education, artistic analysis, critical thinking skills, sex worker rights, and all-around socio-material political critique. By entering your age and being over 18, you consent to viewing the contents within. So I'm going to put in a number here. This isn't my age, but whatever. Alright, raising awareness regarding Bad Empanada and his fascist behaviors and Marxist-Leninism versus Anarcho-Communism. This post appeals to any who wish to help raise awareness about Bad Empanada and his abusive behaviors. Online, i.e. his reactionary fascist behavior kettling trans sex workers and other minorities like a sad little freak, despite him claiming to be an activist who cares about helping minorities by preventing genocide, punching down at me, a trans woman, PhD, ANCOM, activist, sex worker, and voice for sex workers, anti-Zionist, outspoken critic of token trans people, and rape survivor. But also attacking my friends in different intersecting minority communities fighting for our rights alongside the Palestinian struggle, and all areas peoples targeted by genocide, foreign and domestic, e.g. Sudan and Turtle Island, refugees and indigenous peoples, disabled folk, the homeless, POC folk, GNC, and neurodivergent people, etc. So specifically, we're just going to be reading the section where I testify to being a rape survivor. I'm like, look, Bad Empanada, a Marxist-Leninist, is literally calling for trans genocide, and as far as that goes, of course, I legitimately think that you should be in the mines. So Bad Empanada, when he says, blue sky is where you go when you have 15 self-diagnosed mental illnesses and want to be in an echo chamber with other people who also have 15 self-diagnosed mental illnesses. I say, Bad Empanada, you may as well call my friends and I useless eaters at this point. He responds, of course, I legitimately think you should be in the mines. This is originally on October 1st, 2025. I think my reply to him was a week or two after that, but here he is calling for my enslavement. And not just that, my friends being trans people, plural people, sex workers, indigenous people, people of color, just various targets of state vampirism, essentially. He goes on to say, you are a dangerous sex pest, so it's ultimately great for everyone else that you are unemployed and just at home all day writing embarrassing blog posts interspersed with porn of yourself for no reason that no one reads, keeps you away from sexually assaulting people. So, Bad Empanada, a reactionary Marxist-Leninist, is accusing me of being a sex pest and an identity narcissist. So these are terms that are normally used to punch down against trans people, trans women in particular. And he's accusing me of this despite the fact that I'm a rape victim. But it didn't stop him from saying it. Keeping all of that in mind, let's go to my own testimony about my own abuses. And it bears repeating that despite the fact that I continue to update this document, Bad Empanada continued to say things about me and continued to antagonize me, and other people defending him would antagonize me afterwards, despite the fact that I have said repeatedly, look, I'm a rape survivor, I'm not a sex pest, and the work that I do is educational in nature. It isn't just to flashbang people with pornography for no reason. It's not me flashing in public. It's not indecent exposure. It's praxis. It's educational. It's activism. It's not counter-revolutionary behavior. But that's what I was being accused of, despite the fact that I had testified extensively to my own abuses, on top of the fact that this is a matter of research. So if you scroll down to about the middle of the document, you get to, I'm a rape survivor. Abusers, TERFs or otherwise, MLs or otherwise, often take pleasure in not just hurling new abuse at someone, but getting them to talk about past abuse so the attacker can deny it, i.e. blaming the victim, the whore, the thinking queer, women, but also trans, intersex, or non-binary people, for the system's abuses. But this ain't my first rodeo. I, Persephone Waard, am a survivor of rape. So are many of my friends. R.E., an interview with Victoria Sakes, which we'll read after I go over this. Here I'll be focusing on me. To it, let's talk about my rape and rapist, i.e., while also remembering Bad Empanada and my evidence against him wrongly accusing me of rape, other related abuses commonly levied against trans people, especially trans women, aka men in women's spaces, quote unquote, by fascists, r.e. stalking, sexual assault, not respecting consent, and being a sex pest, degenerate, etc. I was raped by my ex in Florida from mid-2020 to January 2022. Quote, this brings us once more to Jadis, real name Lindsay Wheeler, a person not without means, at least according to my admittedly limited intelligence at this point, thus someone I unmask here, Scooby-Doo style, with some degree of risk, especially since Donald Trump is now president. Whatever hells they visit upon me, should they try to, this step towards my own hell is one that decolonizes their awful notions of such things, i.e., they were the first TERF swerve I encountered in person, and the primary motivating factor for writing Sex Positivity as a series, which started with the intent to discuss TERFs, and not only why they suck, but how they, as witch cops, look like witches policing their own kind. Next page. Jadis was a traitor who raped me. Unquote. Going mask off, showing Jadis's face, 2025. Image. Source, Persephone Ward's Why I Submit, a Subby-Gothicist's Attitudes on Metroidvania, Mommy Doms, and Sexual Persecution, 2021. I would go on to detail these proceedings at length in multiple pieces of writing. To that, these exhibits are screen caps from previously recorded videos produced between us with their full knowledge and consent. The videos were recorded with their full permission, explicitly for me to keep for my personal enjoyment. Jadis enjoyed knowing I had them, effectively making them homemade porn between two willing and eager participants. The screen caps used are before sexual activity takes place, with Jadis either having all of their clothes still on, or the nude portions of their body off camera, i.e. my showing of these recorded conversations is proof that they occurred, not to demonstrate their total pornographic contents, which I refrain from showing in these exhibits, exceptions being towards myself as nude solo, to demonstrate the erotic qualities of courtship that took place between us, what Jadis and I exchanged prior to us moving in together. Jadis abused me repeatedly in ways I have explained in the past, re Escaping Jadis, July 6, 2024, and shall explain again here. The context for these screen caps is to give vital background to what I am explaining, and to show my abuser more than I have previously done in earlier accounts. In short, I'm putting a face to the alias, my right as a victim outing that portion of my abuser as I see fit. My past accounts of abuse regarding them have been up since at least early 2023, e.g., You Really Do Have a Beautiful Body, Source Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion, or Gothic Communism Manifesto, modified from July 2022 to 11/4/2023, but expanding in 2024 to include censored images of Jadis's body but not their face, and more detailed accounts of their abuse, source Transforming Our Zombie Selves, June 27, 2024. Furthermore, the older examples cite even older material that has been online since before 2022 and includes uncensored images of Jadis's face and real name, e.g. Why I Submit, February 19, 2021, recordings of Jadis identifying themselves in their profession for the mic, e.g. Dreadful Discourse, Episode 1, What is the Gothic, June 26, 2020, me with my arm around them after they graduated from UF, source tweet, Nick's Movie Insight, May 6, 2021. The point being, Jadis has known about my identifying writings of them since before we broke up, many of which they offered feedback on, being cited in my writings about them after we broke up, calling them my abuser and later still my rapist. The rape claim has been active for over 6 months, and my claims of abuse for roughly 2 years. Not once has Jadis ever contacted me after February 14, 2022, either to harass or ask me to cease and desist, to which I reasoned back then and now. They know about the claims and ability for the name to be connected to the alias, but haven't done anything about it, i.e., that it wouldn't be especially difficult for anyone reading these publicly available accusations to follow the references back to their original publicly available sources, thus to acquire Jadis's full name, where they went to school, what they look like, and ultimately what they did to me. This also includes publicly available Google Docs that detail their abuse, not just cursorily, but in vivid and extensive detail. Re, setting the record straight again, accounting my ex's abuse of me to another victim, August 30th, 2022, and setting the record straight, my ex's abuse of me, February 17th, 2022. Said documents have been up, live and unaltered, since their posting dates. Jadis has not once reached out to me to acknowledge them, but apart from blocking their Twitter main, I have made no effort to hide my work from them, either. I've even written about their abuse of me and other people and featured images of all of us together, e.g. Tim with Jadis and I, exhibit 39A2B, escaping Jadis, and Jadis still hasn't done anything. I can only reason that I either know they're guilty and or don't care, and to my knowledge are still living with the other abused person, i.e. their former ex, Tim, who knows everything about Jadis because I told them, and were with them longer than I was, over 10 years versus roughly 2. Despite this, I have since been accused of rape before when talking about my own abuse, i.e. when talking about unrelated things, only to have it brought up by future abusers, Ari, from replying to John Barbaras, a follow-up to my Is Metal Racist video 2025. Moderates, for example, rank rape to uphold capital through rape apologia, e.g. Richard Dawkins saying he cares about women when in truth he only cares about policing the bodies and language of victims, women or not, i.e. Melissa McEwen's 2013 article about him was eventually taken down. For many survivors of sexual abuse, lasting trauma is defined not by the actual acts, not by their quality or quantity, but by the support they receive following the abuse. Dawkins notes that, as soon as he got away from his abuser, I ran to tell my friends, many of whom had had the same experience with him. He may not recognize that as a crucial point in his not suffering lasting harm, but the fact that he immediately found support among peers who validated his experience, who neither shamed him nor called him a liar, and the fact that years later they would still speak to one another about the abuse after the abuser died, is an invaluable resource to a survivor, which many of us do not have. To the contrary, many survivors of sexual abuse are silenced and neglected and shamed by the very people who are meant to support and protect us. The difference between someone like Dawkins and victims like us of any kind of rape/power abuse, reading the room, is just that, victimhood in service to workers and solidarity. While Dawkins was abused himself, McEwen reminds us how he used his lived abuse to encourage further abuse systemically, to bury his feelings and punch down. In other words, he's a cunt. To clarify, and as to be crystal clear, ranking abuse, but especially rape of any sort, is generally done to deny its existence, e.g. I was raped, then accused of not actually being raped, i.e. by someone who was defending a crypto-fascist from criticism, a form of tone policing that bullies the victim while blaming and gaslighting them. Gen X Gamer, in A Token Bigot Goes Full Mask Off Fascist, May 11th, 2025, goes full mask off, i.e. this time saying he'll prove that I'm a fraud, only to employ witch hunt and conversion therapy arguments while detonating me and misgendering my friends and I. He also apologizes for sexual sex worker abuse, slut and kink shames myself and others, hates and artists, poor people, service workers, denies the validity of my arguments and relationships, calls me a coward for talking about my own rape, and attacks my professions, re sex worker and erotic artist fundraising for sex workers and disabled people, with him literally comparing me to Andrew Tate while confessing to his own wife being a sex pest. All while still being racist, sexist, and transphobic as he brown-noses Carl Jobst. Dude straight up is asking for Carl, a broke crypto-fascist who misled his own audience to fleece them, now a matter of public record, re the judge from Billy Mitchell's lawsuit certifying Carl's defamatory actions, to sue me for calling Carl and Gen X racist. Beyond cis and racial minorities, and MLs, which I suppose are a political marginality, at least in the US, have also been accused by other trans people and or sex workers of rape, not respecting women. Much of my transphobic hate coming from the gaming community, FPS Metal fans defending their favorite franchise from me, re No Girls or Trans People Allowed 2020. Most of this came from straight white guys, mind you, but some of the hatred also came from GNC folk punching down at me as some kind of toy-breaking asshole, e.g. my ex-friend Jade, a Doom fan who met me through my 2020 Doom Eternal review, the one that got all the trans hate. Someone who, loving metal, horror movies, video games, and action figures, tried to get me to transvestigate my own partner, only to incite violence against both of us when I refused, i.e. from other sex workers, many of whom were cis, but some who were not, re. Setting the Record Straight, Transmedia Experience 5/26/2023, and Policing the Horror 2024. The reality of being a survivor is we are often not believed by allies, and even by other survivors of rape who rank rape according to varying degrees of privilege and oppression, e.g. men rank rape with cis women, but cis women rank rape with trans women, these realities intersecting with class and race as well. Kat Black, for instance, is a survivor of abuse, and someone also trans, who is all too familiar with the realities of surviving rape. I am a survivor of sexual violence. I've openly spoken about that many times, and something that I'm truly coming to embrace is that we don't really live in a society that gives victims of sexual violence justice. Even if you have proof, even if you have evidence, the likelihood of you seeing your rapist put away is very, very slim. And even when you do, it's almost always for a very, very short amount of time. Source: Kat Black's DoorDash Girl, and why I'm glad I never reported. In my case, I survived my rapist only to fall into the arms of another abuser. But that is a story for another day. If you want to read about that and even more stuff here, some of which is not safe for work. Again, this is age-gated. You can keep scrolling down and reading, but we're going to cut it off there. That is a summary of me talking about my own rape multiple times in regards to other people doing the same, part of a larger conversation. So there are plenty of instances therein where I have had to talk about my rape not once, not twice, but multiple times, and trying to do it as part of a larger movement, wherein trans people are often accused, in bad faith, of being sex pests by bad actors, re. Bad Empanada, and token Marxist-Leninists with reactionary behaviors therein. So keeping all of that in mind, I've also tried to include the testimony of other people as well, and not just Kat Black, someone that I don't know, but also one of my partners. And that brings us to a testimony, an interview with Victoria Sakes, which we will read next. Hailing Hellions, an interview with Victoria Sakes, March 26, 2025. This interview is for Hailing Hellions, a Q&A series where I interview sex workers or ex-sex workers who have modeled for me in my sex positivity book project. Today's guest is Victoria Sakes. This is the Safe for Work version. Click here for the Safe for Work version interview compendium. The longer title of Sex Positivity being Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion or Gothic Communism, Liberating Sex Work Under Capitalism Through Iconoclastic Art, 2023, part of an overarching argument that connects sex positivity to what I call Gothic gay anarcho-communism. Sex positivity essentially provides a hybrid, i.e. one established between academic, Gothic, queer, game, and Marxist theories, and wherein applied theory towards universal liberation is achieved by challenging capitalist realism, the inability to imagine a world beyond capitalism at a grassroots level. To Gothic communism specifically occurs to direct mutual worker action and informed intersectional solidarity related to Gothic poetics, BDSM, monsters, and kink, but specifically what I call Little Gothic BDSM, re. rape play. General content warning: BDSM, Gothic content and theatrics, e.g. rape play and death theater, as well as sex worker abuse and bigotry of various kinds, variable per interview, discussions of sex work, underwear photos, photos of sex toys, and fascism. Specific content warning: sexual assault, use of the word rape, as well as intersex abuse, forced surgery. Concerning images, censorship, and permissions, all images are of the model or myself, unless otherwise stated. As this is the Safe for Work version of the interview, the images are relatively tame, cropped, or censored. To see the spicier stuff each model offers, go to the Not Safe for Work version of this series on my website. Any publicly available images are exhibited for purposes of education, transformation, and critique, thus fall under fair use. Private nude material and collabs with models are specifically shared with permission from the original models. For more details about artist permissions, refer to the book disclaimer. About the series, like the book series it attaches to, Hailing Hellions aims to educate and critique, i.e. by raising awareness towards sex worker rights, but also gender nonconformity through Gothic counterculture. This extends to gender identity, e.g. trans, NB, or intersex, but also orientation and performance, i.e. BDSM and sex positivity, through Gothic theatrical roles that invite things beyond vanilla, heteronormative, thus conservative, reactionary, and harmful sexuality. I would consider this to be things like mommy-doms and consent, non-consent, breeding fantasies, and heavy metal, e.g. satanic material, and the Gothic at large. Also, these questions are broader insofar as they cover wide praxial poetic ideas and concepts. Regarding these, the opinions of the subject and myself are not identical, but often overlap through us collaborating together to raise awareness. About the interviewee, Victoria is a friend of a friend, and actually now we're dating, but this was before we were dating. One of my Metamor's play partners from New Zealand and someone from the same Discord server. We fags stick together on and offline. They're intersex and a past survival sex worker and survivor of rape who has since moved on to different kinds of work. They're a super sweetie and someone who has supported my work effusively insofar as I talk extensively about healing from rape by subverting it through BDSM, ludology, and Gothic poetics, monsters and murder, rape, theater. Over the past year or so, their feedback and enthusiasm has been invaluable, as well as working and playing with them whenever I've gotten a chance. Vic's a class act and a total baddie, so tall and thick. Hi everyone, my name is Persephone Waard. I'm a trans woman erotic artist, sex worker, writer, author, and researcher who specializes in cross-media studies. I have my independent PhD in Gothic poetics and Little Gothic BDSM, focusing partially on Metroidvania. Victoria, could you introduce yourself and share a little about yourself with our audience? Hello, I'm Vincent or Victoria, but you can call me anything you want. I'm a 34-year-old pan-ace guy from New Zealand who, for 2 years, from 18 to 20, became a casual sex worker to help out my family with money, as I was the only one who had a job at that point in my household. I was living in the garage at that point, as there was not enough room in the house for me. As the youngest son from my mother's first marriage, and a constant reminder of the first family she had, and the decision she made at my birth, born intersex, and was made to develop into a boy as mom and dad thought it might be a harder life as a 6'2" woman when I grew up. In any event, my mother was homeschooling my younger half-brother and sister, and my stepfather had lost his job over having asked his boss at the time to remove the nudie mags in the workshop toilets, as it wasn't proper for a workplace. I also have autism and ADHD. I diagnosed despite MHPs saying I had it, but didn't want to give me the label, as it would make it harder for me as an adult. I managed to move out of home properly at 20, but had to fall back to living with my mom or older brother for the next 10 years, after breaking up with my then fiancée after her getting pregnant to another guy. My surgeries to help me develop made me sterile, who then laid a false rape claim against me that got easily disproven, but the damage to my reputation had been done, so I had to move cities and eventually change my name legally to protect myself, and so I could still get work. So not much luck with relationships and being what society wanted of me. Over the last 4 years of not living with family, I did a year of counseling and then recovery from that. Since then, I have become more comfortable with myself. I've started dressing up as what could have been if the coin had been flipped the other way. Hooray for finding Vicky. Also, I helped run the local Rainbow Youth Group before handing it back to the younger generation. It was around this time that a person on Twitter reposted a picture of me, and I started a friendship with him, who then invited me into a Discord server in which I met you, Persephone. This book project views sex positivity as a liberating act. What does sex positivity mean to you? Illustrating mutual consent. i.e., can porn illustrate mutual consent when sex workers are constantly dehumanized by the profit motive and the status quo? Sex positivity, to me, means being able to be who and what you are and being free to do what you need to do without feeling shame for it, because we are beautiful creatures in this world and owe it to ourselves to be true. Society and the ones who push workers down and make them feel bad are just wrong and can't understand the feeling and joy that comes from within while doing the work, i.e. being in the moment and feeling seen for a moment, even if it is brief, raw, primal, chest-bursting pride and emotion. I am a beast, hear me roar. Being dehumanized for the work just to get paid for the need to get paid is not right, i.e. a dancer or an artist creating something using their body gets applauded and praised for it, while a sex worker or sex actor get told, okay, get ready for the next shoot or client, you are nothing and will burn for this come reaping time. And being made to feel filthy or lesser because of it hurts on a level most people don't know. I imagine there is some really good agents out there that do care for these workers and treat them right, but from what I'm seeing as the years go on, is the content is getting more violent and dangerous as people are getting desensitized to everything in it. There does need to be informed and mutual consent for this line of work and protection in place, and destigmatized socially as it is a needed career in a world, i.e. that is growing further apart and more online and less in person. People can go years or decades without the physical touch that they need to survive properly. And this interview is actually quite lengthy, so I wanted to read the opening, and since we've done that, I wanted to quote the instances of Victoria talking about their own survival as a victim of rape. So I'll just be quoting that portion of the interview, but if you want to read the entire interview itself, I will leave a link to it. It isn't age-gated. You can go and read it and find out everything about them. They're a wonderful person. What did you enjoy most about sex work? What got you started in it? I don't really remember much of it, as I was able to separate mind from body for the most part. It was just a means of money coming in to help my family keep the house and food on the table. It was during that time that I figured out I was ace because for me, it just felt mechanical and a means to an end. And being honest, I haven't had sex in 13 years, so I wonder if I might like it now that I'm older and have come to terms with things. What I did like was the feeling that I was in control of my body and that it wasn't under another's control, e.g. with me being raped at 13 by my first boyfriend and his friend, and that it is my choice, i.e. the feeling of having personal power and that, hey, I guess there is something that is desirable about my body. I later realized that I had a very twinkish body when I was younger. God, I miss it. How do you feel about BDSM and using calculated risk to confront and heal from trauma? i.e. using collars or whips to experience pain or control as pleasurable, not harmful. I love collars, for instance. I think it is a fantastic way to heal from trauma, i.e. it reteaches trust in others, giving up or taking control again, after what happened to me when I was 13. I was at a sleepover party with my first boyfriend and one of his friends, and they spiked my drink gradually till I had to go to bed. I passed out only to wake up tied spread eagle on my front, with my boyfriend in my throat and another in my ass. They proceeded to rape me multiple times, switching back and forth and then leaving me there till the next afternoon. And when I got untied, my boyfriend told me not to tell anyone, otherwise he would tell the whole world, school, I was gay. This is back in 2004, when it was very much still not good to be out. I wasn't able to wear a watch or have my shirt cuffs or socks put too much pressure on my wrists and ankles for years afterwards, i.e. without having panic attacks. Then I learned about self-bondage and started looking into BDSM-related stuff. Through it, I learned to turn the trauma into something that was calming to me and fun and pleasurable. So sometimes if I have had a rough day, I tie myself up to get some relaxing sleep or to decompress for a while, i.e. the loss of control created by yourself or a trusted partner feels amazing, and I'm really happy I found a way to reshape my trauma. I would suggest it to others who need help healing too. To which I say, you're really brave for talking about that. I was raped myself, but the specifics of mine involved total financial control and isolation during COVID, emotional and fiscal manipulation, coercing sex and other forms of labor out of me. Even so, from one victim to another, everyone's trauma is valid and needs to be heard. So often rape victims are blamed and or fetishized for their abuse, e.g. white straight women are turned into sluts, vampire ladies of the night after being abused, but despite often being pimped for it, are also prioritized in Gothic media over other rape survivors. It's important for rape victims to feel comfortable being able to speak out about such things, without shame or bias inside, but also outside themselves. Does BDSM inform the sex work that you do in an educational or therapeutic way? Okay, let me see if there's any other. Okay, yeah, so that's essentially all of the discussions between Victoria and I about their testimony. But notice how we're talking about it to a healing degree, to discuss it at all, and then can theatrical disempowerment feel healing or therapeutic to you in regards to real trauma? For instance, yes, it would help me immensely if I was to recreate the event from my past in a controlled environment / scene, with someone I trust to turn it into something good. Not being in control per se, but knowing I have some say in what is happening this time would, I think, be massive and healing. So revisiting the scene of the crime, the grave, in the neo-Gothic setting, to reenact rape in a way that is oftentimes quite campy, but through Ludo-Gothic BDSM, playfulness, Gothic poetics, and BDSM, the control and playing with power in often unequal ways, with people having assigned roles, that through calculated risk allows people to recover from rape in ways that incidentally serve as testimony for other people looking in. There's a voyeur exhibitionist component to that. Even if the person is ace, in Vic's case and many other sex workers that I work with, they are asexual insofar as they talk about sexual trauma through asexual means, often public nudism or naked trauma in Gothic stories and poetics, to have a dialectical material effect or interrogation of things that are often alien to most people. Rape is something that is alien to people because it's so taboo that unless you've been there yourself, you aren't gonna get it, so to speak, more often than not, unless you have some kind of parallel trauma like child abuse that mirrors the same kind of abuse that rape victims more broadly, like sexually, might experience themselves. Victims of child abuse probably understand it, even if they never experienced sexual abuse themselves, because rape is about power. It's not about sex, though it often involves sex as something to overpower and dominate through state models, through the nuclear model, the household, the patriarch, etc. So, all of that being said, this has been a video where I talk about the testimony of not just myself, but people I know. I talk about state vampirism, and this is all a response, has been in response to On the Files by Lady Izdihar, where they invited people to talk about it, perhaps in ways that they got more than they bargained for when saying, hey, why don't you talk about it? And wouldn't you know it, I've written about this multiple times. I have a book series effectively about this, and I've interviewed multiple victims of rape who are comfortable with me sharing these interviews publicly. So, yeah, there you go. This is hopefully rich food for thought in a time when it behooves us not to stay silent. Silence is genocide, and it is important for us to keep talking about these things and to do it while various other Jenga blocks, or I guess the opposite of Jenga blocks, it's kind of like a Jenga block. Well, anyways, the metaphor being that as things continue to pile up for the state and they gradually lose control of the situation during labor strikes, general labor strikes in action, boycotts, what have you, that includes people speaking out about the Epstein files, about rape more broadly, as something that we are striking not just to fight for better basic conditions, but also to prevent rape in the future systemically by transforming capital and the state into something that is horizontally arranged, a stateless, classless, moneyless, raceless, gender nonconforming society. That, through what we're doing, intersectional solidarity and teamwork, we are able to raise emotional Gothic intelligence and class, culture, and race awareness tied to an intersectional struggle, fighting an intersectional problem by holistic means through a pedagogy of the oppressed, technical unity, what have you. That includes anarcho-communists such as myself. It includes Marxist-Leninists such as Lady Izdihar, and where all of us are joining hands to fight for the collective rights of all people, despite the fact that we have different degrees of oppression and privilege. All of this being said, thank you for watching. I hope you find this informative and healing as far as what's going on right now. Not just for people who have sexual trauma unto themselves, though that's largely, the target audience of this video, but also for allies who may not have experienced this kind of trauma, but who feel frightened by the state under capitalist realism, essentially raping their minds, bombarding them with various forms of propaganda saying, if you don't comply, we will murder you in the street. We will essentially rape you to death. Because what do you think Holocaust by bullet is? It's a form of rape. You're taking away someone's power to harm them, in this case irreversibly, by murdering them through state-sanctioned executions. That can be immensely terrifying, and that is often a tool of the rapist through terror weapons that attack not just the body, but the mind and the spirit over time through threats of force that aren't just mere talk. They are enacted by state actors, rapists. What do you think cops are? Cops rape. All cops are bad. All states are bad. Why do you think we're trying to get to a classless, stateless, moneyless society? We want to do away with these things, but it takes time. In any event, I hope you find it useful in that respect as gearing you towards that process and helping the next generation and the one that follows and the one that follows on and on. This is me contributing to a larger struggle. Speaking of Jenga blocks or reverse Jenga blocks, anyways, my ludology degree is failing me right now. In any event, I hope you found it useful, and I want you to not just support the work that I do. If you like it, like, share, and subscribe, but also go over to Lady Izdihar, like, share, and subscribe to them as well. They do wonderful work, especially their short form content, but everything that they do communicates a lot of ideas in ways that are not only conducive to quick, easy access, but also they're not reactionary. I actually respect the work that they do a lot, even though I've critiqued them mildly in the past. It is generally from a place of good faith, and by and large, I think that they're awesome. They are a wonderful comrade and ally as far as all of this goes. Support them. You can also, again, read more about my work, and you can support people that I talk about, not just myself, but other people that I've interviewed or cited in my work as part of a larger project. In any event, thank you for watching. Stay safe out there, and until next time, good luck, comrades.